They say that the worst part is not the fall, but what comes next. You just went through what people call death of the ego, or maybe you are caught in an inner silence that nobody else seems to understand. If you feel lost in stillness, without clear goals or an eye defined by which to fight, if the motivation that moved you before has evaporated after your spiritual awakening, I want you to know that you are not alone and that this confusion has a deep meaning that few understand. Carl Jung, the psychologist who revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche, understood these phases better than anyone. He did not see them as the end, but as the beginning of something much more real and authentic. In this content, we are going to immerse ourselves in Jung's teachings to unravel why you lose all motivation after spiritual awakening, and how this apparent darkness can be your greatest portal towards individuation and to find a motivation that springs directly from the soul. Stay with me, because what you are going to discover can change forever the way you see yourself and your transformation day. Have you wondered why, after a spiritual awakening or a deep personal crisis, life seems to have lost its color? It is not something that happens overnight. It is more subtle, as if a silent fog had been installed on your existence. First, you began to see through the illusions that previously moved your life: automatic patterns, social masks, the incessant career for approval. This perception brought an initial relief, a feeling of release, but shortly after something unexpected came, an inner silence that you did not know how to interpret. It was as if an internal voice that always whispered, "Do more, I know more, I had more," would have simply stopped. What follows is a gradual decrease in the sense of meaning, not dramatic as a clinical depression, but almost imperceptibly. The things that excited you before, projects, goals, even relationships, begin to seem empty, as if you were watching a movie in which you no longer recognize yourself as the protagonist. A peculiar feeling arises then, not the emptiness of sadness, but the void of those who lost the compass. The will to pursue objectives simply evaporates, and you are in a state that few understand, too awake to return to the old patterns, but too lost to know what is the next step. Here is the cruel paradox that nobody tells you about spiritual awakening. You expected to bring passion, renewed purpose, a more intense interior flame. But for many, especially those with an introspective and sensitive nature, the opposite occurs. It is as if the awakening had turned off a fire that you didn't even know. Where there was emergency before, there is now indifference. Where before there was fear of not reaching enough, now there is a strange carefreeness with the achievements. You are thinking, before I cried for not doing enough, now I don't care if I do something or not. This transformation can be deeply disorienting because it goes against everything that society teaches us about growth and evolution. We hope that awakening will make us more productive, more focused, more enlightened in the conventional sense. But the reality is that the real awakening often leaves us in an unknown territory, where the old motivations no longer work and the new ones have not yet emerged. It is a state of transition that Carl Jung understood deeply and that he considered not only normal, but essential for the development of the human soul. Carl Jung had already observed this post-desperate fog when he discussed the awareness of the unconscious. For him, it was not an anomaly or a failure of the spiritual process, but an inevitable and necessary phase of what it called individuation. Jung understood that when a person begins to awaken the deepest realities of the psyche, he inevitably finds what he described as a psychological death, not the death of the body, but the dissolution of the ancient identity and the structures of meaning that life had sustained until that moment. It is as if the scaffolding of your personality collapsed, leaving you temporarily without a clear frame of reference. The ego, that part of us that identifies with roles, achievements, and the image we project into the world, does not disappear completely during this process, but it is deeply confused. Jung compared him to a navigator who suddenly loses his map in the middle of the ocean. The ego had depended on certain reference points, social status, material goals, external approval, to orient in life. When spiritual awakening reveals the illusory nature of these reference points, the ego is without its usual map, resulting in that characteristic lack of motivation that so many experience. It is not that you have lost the ability to act, but that you have lost the family, reasons to act. Jung was very clear when pointing out that this absence of motivation is not necessarily depression or loss in the pathological sense, but a state of psychological limbo between the old and the new. It's like being in space between two worlds. You no longer belong to the world of ego-directed motivations, but you have not yet found your place in the realm of the authentic motivation that arises from the self. This intermediate state can feel like being suspended in the air without a solid soil under the feet. But Jung insisted that it was precisely in this apparently empty space where the true transformation occurs. For Jung, this phase represented what he called a sacred pause, an essential incubation period that allows something completely new to emerge. He saw this time not as a waste of time or a setback, but as a crucial part of the individual process, that trip to becoming who you really are. Jung believed that without this pause, without this period of apparent inactivity, the psyche cannot reorganize around a more authentic center. It is as if life itself forces you to stop so you can hear a deeper voice that had been drowned by the noise of superficial ambitions. Most people live driven by what Jung called ego-based motivation, that force that pushes us to constantly seek approval, success, recognition, and a sense of importance in the world. This motivation is deeply intertwined with what Jung called the person, that social mask we build to navigate in the world and obtain what we think we need. The person is not inherently bad. It is a necessary psychological tool that allows us to function in society. But the problem arises when we completely identify with this mask, believing that we are really what we project abroad. When this happens, all our motivation is based on feeding and protecting this constructed identity. During the process of spiritual awakening, one of the first things that happens is that this social mask, the person, begins to disintegrate. It is as if you could suddenly see through the costume that you had been using your whole life. The roles that previously defined you, the successful professional, the perfect father, the obedient son, begin to feel empty performances. Jung observed that when the person is stripped, the ancient objectives that were based on maintaining and improving this mask simply stop making sense. That is why many people after awakening feel completely disoriented. It is not that they have lost the ability to have goals, but have lost family reasons to have them. This loss of motivation is not a personal failure or a sign that something is wrong with you. Jung saw her as a sign of healthy psychological growth. It is as if your psyche had overcome the fuel that before fed it. Imagine that for years you have been running with low-quality gasoline, and suddenly your engine refuses to work with that fuel. It is not that the engine is broken. It now requires a higher quality fuel. Similarly, after awakening, your psyche begins to reject superficial motivations and demand something more authentic and aligned with your true nature. Jung understood that this deconstruction phase, although uncomfortable, is absolutely necessary for genuine psychological development. Without it, we remain trapped in motivation patterns that keep us away from our true potential. It is as if life itself conspired to force us to find deeper and more authentic reasons to live. The loss of ego-based motivation is not the end of the road. It is the necessary cleaning of the terrain so that something completely new and more true can grow. Jung firmly believed that the ultimate goal of human development is not to serve the ego, but to integrate it and align it with something much bigger and deep. The self, capital Self. The self, in Jungian psychology, represents the totality of your being, not only the conscious personality, but also the unconscious aspects, the innate wisdom, and that divine spark that connects you with something universal. It is as if within you there was a central sun that has been shining all your life, but that had been obscured by the clouds of the concerns of the ego. The individuation process is precisely the trip to this center, towards living from this most authentic source of motivation and purpose. When you start aligning with the self, you experience a completely different type of motivation. It is no longer the frantic motivation of the ego that constantly seeks external validation, but a quiet but powerful motivation that arises from the connection with your deepest essence. This new motivation does not care about status, approval, or even success in conventional terms. On the other hand, it focuses on the authentic expression, in living according to your deepest values and contributing to the world in a way that honors your unique nature. It is like the difference between being pushed by fear and being attracted to love. After awakening, your psyche naturally begins to reject what is false or based solely on the needs of the ego. This can manifest in very practical ways. Perhaps your previous work no longer satisfies you. Certain relationships feel superficial, or activities that you used to enjoy now they seem empty. Jung saw this not as a loss, but as a refining. Your soul is learning to distinguish between what is genuinely nutritious and what simply feeds the illusion. It is a purification process that, although sometimes painful, leads you to a more authentic and satisfactory life. However, Jung also warned about the danger of getting stuck in the rejection phase and falling into what we would call spiritual evasion, completely disconnect from life under the illusion that nothing matters. The real work of individuation is not to reject the world, but to find a new way to participate in it from your authentic center. The self does not seek to escape from human experience, but to live it fully, redefining your role in the world and integrating what Jung called heaven in human experience. It is to find the sacred in the ordinary, not escape towards an abstract spiritual kingdom. There is a little recognized and rarely discussed phase that occurs after the initial spiritual awakening, a period that Jung understood intimately and that considered crucial for the individual process. It is a phase characterized by a deep silence and an almost inexplicable difficulty to articulate what you are experiencing. While the world around you continues to move at its usual rhythm, you are in a strange state where you have begun to identify you from the ego and its family motivations, but you have not yet found a new way of living from the self. It's like being in space between two breaths. You are no longer inhaling the old air, but you have not yet begun to inhale the new. This psychological pause is what Jung called enantiodromia, a Greek term that means running in the opposite direction, or the tendency of things to become its opposite. Jung observed that the human psyche has a natural tendency towards balance, and when we have been too long at one end, we inevitably oscillate towards the other. In the context of spiritual awakening, this means that after years or decades of effort directed by the ego, that constant pressure of I must do everything, achieve everything, be everything, the inner pendulum ranges towards the deep stillness of the soul, towards a state of why do something at all. Jung compared this phase with the transformation of the caterpillar into a butterfly, specifically with that mysterious moment in the cocoon when the caterpillar literally becomes soup, a substance report that is neither a caterpillar nor butterfly. During this solution period, there is no recognizable form, there is no clear identity, only a pure potential waiting to reorganize in something completely new. Similarly, during this intermediate phase after awakening, you can feel as if you were that psychological soup, neither your ancient self nor your new self, but something in the process of radical transformation that cannot yet be named or understood. This phase can last months or even years, and Jung insisted that it was important not to hurry out of it or try to force a new sense of purpose. It is a deep gestation time where the deepest personality structures are being reorganized around a new center. Trying to accelerate this process is like trying to force a flower to open ahead of time. You can damage the natural development process. Jung believed that this apparently unproductive pause was actually the most productive period of all, where the true alchemy of personal transformation occurs. It is in this silence where the self begins to whisper its first instructions, where the new values begin to crystallize, and where a completely new way of being in the world emerges slowly. As we have explored through the wisdom of Carl Jung, the loss of motivation after spiritual awakening is not a failure or a setback. It is a sacred initiation towards your true being. Jung taught us that this period of apparent emptiness is actually the most fertile space for authentic growth, where the ego learns to serve the self, and where motivations emerge that do not depend on external approval, but on the connection with your deepest essence. This phase of enantiodromia, this transformation into opposites, is the natural process of the psyche reorganizing around a more true center. Now, I want to listen to you. What of this exploration about the authentic individuation and motivation more resonated with you? How is your own day of awakening manifest? Have you experienced that psychological soup that Jung speaks? Share down in the comments. Your story matters deeply and can be exactly what another soul needs to listen to in your own transformation process. If this content touched something deep in you, if it helped you understand that you are not broken but transforming, like and subscribe to the channel. This is a sacred space for deep thinkers, for soul seekers, for those who are tired of pretending and ready to live from their most authentic truth. Activate notifications because we will continue to explore the mysteries of the human psyche through Jung's eyes and other great masters of the inner transformation. Remember, you are not lost, you are finding. You are not broken, you are becoming who you really are. Until next time, and never forget that your inner light is not only necessary, it is irreplaceable.